My name is Shannon White, and my presentation is on the United States and China trade war. The US and China are locked in an escalating trade battle. Donald Trump's hostility to Chinese economic policy dates back to his presidential campaign and has been consistent over the past 2 years. In 2017, the United States launched an investigation into the Chinese trade policies. It imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese products last year. Beijing retaliated back with tariffs on $110 billion of U.S. goods, accusing the U.S. of starting the largest trade war in economic history. In December 2018, after months of hostilities, a breakthrough was made. Both the United States and China agreed to halt new tariffs for 90 days to allow for talks. Those talks yielded some progress, but it delayed the deadline for raising tariffs on March 1st. Tariffs are taxes that are imposed on certain types of imported goods as they enter a country. These tariffs, which went into effect in September 2018, targeted about $200 billion of goods with a 10% tax, scheduled to increase to 25% on January 1st, 2019, and covered a wide range of industrial and consumer items like handbags and washing machines and even railway equipment. The total United States tariffs applied exclusively to China total more than $250 billion US dollars. President Trump has threatened tariffs on another $267 billion worth of goods, meaning all Chinese imports would be subject to tariffs. The total Chinese tariffs applied exclusively to the United States total more than $110 billion US dollars. This graph shows the start of the tariffs on both the United States and China. It shows the growth of tariffs the United States has imposed on China over the course of a 5-month span from $3 billion to over $200 billion. It also shows the tariffs that China retaliated with, starting at $3 billion, growing to over $34 billion in the course of 5 months' time. JCPenney counsel David M. Spooner wrote a letter dated September 6 to U.S. Trade Representative that said no retailer will be able to simply absorb the cost of a 10% tariff, much less a 25% tariff in today's ultra-competitive retail environment. That means ultimately the consumers will pay higher prices. How does this affect our economy? Both the U.S. tariffs on China and China's retaliatory tariffs are likely to impact the economy in various ways. On the basic level, the tariffs will increase the prices of goods directly by making imported goods more expensive by the imposed tax, and indirectly by allowing domestic manufacturers who do not have to pay the tariff to charge higher prices. The increase of prices can either be passed on to us as the consumer or can be absorbed by the companies that buy those products, which causes economic harm. Unlike earlier rounds of tariffs that most likely targeted materials and intermediate goods, about a quarter of the new tariffs targets consumer goods directly. Those tariffs could have an even more direct impact on Americans' wallets than the earlier round of tariffs, which were mostly against industrial products and intermediate goods. Some of the goods that are likely to be hardest hit by the newer tariffs include computer and computer parts, furniture, and tires. Ian Shepperson from Pantheon Macroeconomics said, "We don't know for sure how quickly importers will raise wholesale prices of the affected items or how quickly manufacturers of substitutes for Chinese products will lift their prices." How will the trade war end? According to ChinaBriefing.com, there are 3 different scenarios that could happen to end the trade war. Scenario 1 would be that we could possibly end in an all-out trade war. Scenario 2 would be a new status quo to be reached. And scenario 3 would be that we would negotiate a new trade deal. This slide shows the 3 scenarios. The first scenario shows that high tariffs raise costs for suppliers, manufacturers, retailers, and consumers in the U.S. market. As prices increase, production volume decreases, profit margins diminish, companies go out of business, and jobs are lost. This scenario is improbable as both sides will incur huge costs. Businesses will exert greater pressure on both governments to draw back, which propaganda machinery won't be able to cushion. The second scenario would be a new status quo being reached. This new status quo is reached when trade flow resumes as per usual, but business leaders in both countries seriously assess their future risk for exposure. This scenario is relatively more likely, at least in the near term, as the U.S. stock markets has not reacted kindly to the growing economic uncertainties due to the trade war. Retailers and consumers will also feel the pain more sharply if the tariffs against Chinese imports stay high. The last scenario would involve negotiating a new trade deal. China and the U.S. would strike a new trade deal with concessions negotiated on both sides. After coming to a truce, the two governments will negotiate over bilateral market access, security intellectual property rights, a more level playing field for the private sector in China, and a greater regulatory and customs transparency. A new trade deal between the two countries is possible, but not in the near future. It will take longer than the current Trump administration, and China will be wary of setting a bad precedent where it does not hold the upper hand. Connecting all this with the lectures we have had recently starts with globalization and how it can lead to conflict. Globalization is defined as the process fueled by and resulting in increasing cross-border flows of goods, services, money, people, information, and culture. The trade war has shown that globalization between the United States and China has caused major conflict as each side believes the other is in the wrong. They believe that what they are doing is right and the other should pay tariffs, which makes neither country wanting to back down. That brings the third lecture point into play. With the North-South divide, we learned that the North has more financially strong countries and the South are generally poorer. Both the United States and China are strong countries that reside in the North. That means that we have two very powerful and intellectual countries that think that they can outsmart the other. With this being so, it may take a very long time for the two countries to reconcile their differences and looks as though it may not happen anytime in the future.